The night Nneka Osi Mensah won the Georgia Humanitarian Award, the woman who had inspired her was standing in the back of the ballroom in a borrowed dress, trying not to cry. 3 months earlier, that same woman had been mopping the floors of Grady Memorial Hospital at 2 in the morning, singing softly to herself so she wouldn't fall asleep on her feet. Her name was Dayo Adebisi, and this is her story. But before we go back to where it all began, if you love stories about people who do the right thing when no one is watching, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because what happens at the end of this story? Nobody saw it coming, not even Dayo. Now, let me take you back. Nneka Osi Mensah was 34 years old and running out of reasons to trust people. On paper, her life looked extraordinary. She was the founder and CEO of NecaCare, a healthcare technology company based in Atlanta that had just closed a $40 million Series B funding round. Her platform helped underserved communities access specialist doctors through mobile telehealth, a problem she understood personally because she had grown up watching her mother take 3 buses to see a doctor's in a city that had 2 hospitals and 11 Starbucks. Forbes had profiled her. The governor had shaken her hand. Her face was on a billboard on I-285. But none of that mattered on the Tuesday night. She sat in her car in the parking garage of her own office building for 45 minutes, unable to make herself go upstairs. Because upstairs, her COO and her head of partnerships were waiting to present the results of their audit. An audit she had requested after noticing irregularities in the company's vendor contracts. An audit she already knew the results of because her assistant had accidentally forwarded her the wrong email 3 days ago. They had been funneling money, not a little, not a rounding error, nearly $800,000 over 18 months through shell companies they had set up themselves. Her COO, the man who had given the toast at her 30th birthday, her head of partnerships, the woman who had been the first person to believe in her idea when everyone else said telehealth for low-income communities would never make money. Nneka sat in that parking garage and thought about all the people who had taken from her over the years. Her first business partner, who had registered their original company name under his own LLC while she was grieving her father's death, and then sold the trademark back to her for $60,000 she didn't have. The investor who had strung her along for 8 months with promises of a term sheet, introduced her to every VC in the Southeast, collected her deck and her data and her pitch, and then launched a competing product through his own portfolio company 6 weeks later. The man she had dated for 2 years, who had told everyone in their circle that NecaCare was his idea, that he had mentored her into it, that she was good at execution, but he was the visionary. She had smiled when people repeated this to her because she didn't know what else to do. She was 34 years old, worth more money than her parents had ever seen in their lives, and she trusted no one. Her executive assistant, Priya Kapoor, was the closest thing she had to a friend. Priya had been with her since the beginning, had worked for equity when Nneka couldn't afford a salary, had answered calls at midnight, and never once asked for a thank you. Priya was the person who, after Nneka had fired the COO and the partnerships director on a Wednesday afternoon and cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes, knocked on the door and said, simply, "Smoothie from Jamba Juice, or do you need real food?" Real food. Priya, Nneka said later that evening, still hollow, still raw, sitting on the edge of her desk while Priya packed up to leave. Do you ever wonder if you could tell who someone really is before they show you? Priya looked at her. You mean before they steal from you? Before anybody knows what's at stake, when there's nothing to gain? Priya was quiet for a moment. My grandmother used to say you can tell the character of a person by how they treat someone they don't have to be kind to. Nneka sat with that for a long time after Priya left, and then she made a decision that Priya, when she found out 3 weeks later, would describe as either the bravest or the most unhinged thing she had ever heard of. Nneka called a staffing agency the next morning. Not for Nneka care, for herself. She explained what she needed: a placement as a contract hospital worker, environmental services, food service, any entry-level role. She would work under a different name. She would not tell anyone who she was. She had a board meeting in 3 weeks and a speaking engagement after that, which Priya would manage. For 30 days, she wanted to disappear. The agency rep went quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, can I ask why?" "I need to remember something," Nneka said, "and I can only remember it if nobody knows who I am." She went to Target and bought the plainest clothes she owned: scrub pants, a fleece pullover, plain white sneakers. She took her jewelry off. She pulled her locks back. She looked in the mirror. The CEO was gone. In her place was a woman who looked tired in a familiar, ordinary way. A woman you might see on the train and not look at twice. She introduced herself at Grady Memorial as Nadia Ekwu. Nadia, close enough to her middle name that she'd answer to it. Ekwu, her mother's maiden name. Nobody asked questions. They handed her a uniform, showed her the supply closet, and put her on the overnight shift for environmental services, which meant mopping floors, sanitizing rooms, emptying biohazard bins at 2 in the morning. She had not mopped a floor since she was 12 years old. Her back hurt by the end of the first night. Her feet hurt by the end of the second. By the end of the first week, she had learned that the vending machine on the 4th floor had a broken sensor that gave you 2 bags of chips if you hit the button twice, that the charge nurse on nights was a woman named Renee, who remembered every patient's name and nobody else's, and that the woman who worked the adjacent corridor, the woman who always seemed to be singing softly, just under her breath, was someone she couldn't stop noticing. Her name, Nneka learned, was Dio Adebisi, 31 years old, born in Ibadan, Nigeria. She had come to the United States 7 years ago on a student visa to study nursing at Georgia State. She had graduated. She had passed her NCLEX on the first try. She had applied for nursing positions at 14 hospitals in the Atlanta metro area. Nneka only knew this because on her 8th night, she arrived to find Dio sitting on the floor of the supply closet at midnight, not crying exactly, but close. A rejection letter in her hand printed out, which Nneka noticed, which meant she had printed it somewhere and carried it and read it multiple times. "Hey," Nneka said, stopping in the doorway. "You okay?" Dio looked up. She had the kind of face that tried to smile automatically before the rest of her caught up. "I'm fine, sorry. I'll be out in a second, You don't have to be out. I just need the mop bucket." Dio laughed, a short, surprised sound. She moved over. Nneka got the bucket and then, instead of leaving, sat down on a crate of paper towels across from her. "Bad news?" Nneka asked, nodding at the letter. Dio looked at it. "Another rejection. Nursing position. It's she counted quietly. 12, 12, 12. She folded the letter carefully along its existing creases like she'd done it many times. They always say the same thing: lack of domestic clinical experience. Which makes sense. I didn't do clinicals here. I did them back home before I came. But there's no pathway to." She stopped. "You don't need to hear all this," I asked. Dio looked at her for a moment. Then, quietly, she talked. She had a daughter, Abina, 5 years old, the most serious child Dio had ever met, who had opinions about which library books were worth her time and had recently decided that carrots were nutritionally acceptable but culturally uninspiring, which Dio suspected she had heard somewhere and was testing out. Abina's father had returned to Nigeria 2 years into their marriage, when it became clear that America was harder than either of them had imagined, and that he was unwilling to be humbled by hard. He wanted me to come back with him, Dio said, but Abena was born here. She's American, and I had worked so hard. She shook her head. I stayed. She mopped floors from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. She slept from 8 to 1. She picked Abena up from the neighbor who watched her during the day, made dinner, helped with homework, read library books until Abena fell asleep. Then she got up and did it again. Do you ever regret staying? Naneka asked. Dio thought about it seriously. No, she said, finally. I didn't stay because it was easy. I stayed because I knew who I was trying to become. And that person doesn't quit. A pause. I just wish the paperwork agreed. Naneka went home that morning and sat in her car outside her parking garage for a long time. She went back the next night, and the night after that. She and Dio fell into the rhythm of people who work the same strange nocturnal hours, sharing a vending machine dinner at 3 in the morning, comparing notes on which floors were hardest, talking in low voices so they didn't wake the patients in the rooms they were cleaning. Naneka learned things about Dio by watching her. She watched Dio spend 40 minutes with an elderly patient named Mr. Carol, who had no family visitors and kept calling Dio by his late daughter's name. Dio never corrected him. She just answered and held his hand and told him she was fine, that she was eating well, that work was going well, that she hadn't forgotten to call. She watched Dio find a young woman sitting in the hallway at 4 in the morning, a new mother, shell-shocked, unable to stop shaking. The woman had no partner with her, no family, no one. Dio sat with her for 25 minutes, just present, asking nothing, until a nurse came back on rounds, and the woman seemed to remember how to breathe. She watched Dio encounter their supervisor, a man named Gerald, who spoke to the overnight environmental staff the way people speak to furniture. Not unkindly, exactly, just without seeing them, and respond with the same warmth she gave to everyone else. Not performance, just default. On day 18, Naneka witnessed the moment that settled it. It was a Thursday, cold for Atlanta. Dio had worked a double. Someone had called out, and Dio had stayed. Not because she'd been asked to, but because she'd seen the look on the charge nurse's face and said, simply, I can stay. By the time 6:30 in the morning came, Dio had been on her feet for 16 hours. Naneka was coming off her own shift, coat on, bag over her shoulder, heading for the exit, when she saw Dio in the lobby. Not leaving, standing with a teenage boy, maybe 16, who was sitting in one of the hard plastic lobby chairs with a split lip and a look on his face that Naneka recognized. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been trying not to fall apart for a very long time. Dio was crouched in front of him at his eye level, not standing over him, level with him. Naneka didn't hear what they said. She watched from across the lobby for 7 minutes, while Dio talked to this boy who was not her patient, not her problem, not her responsibility, while her own child was at home, while she had been awake since 2 o'clock the previous afternoon, while she had nowhere to be except horizontal. When the boy's mother finally came through the doors, frantic, rushing, Dio stood, told the mother where to check her son in, and then walked to the exit. She passed Naneka on the way out. Friend of yours. Never met him before. Dio pulled her coat tighter. He just looked like someone who needed someone to stay. Neka went home and called Priya before she'd even taken her coat off. I found her, she said. Found who? The person I needed to find. I need you to do something for me. That's never good. I need you to research a visa pathway for an internationally trained nurse. Name is Dio Adebisi, Georgia State nursing graduate, NCLEX licensed. I need to know everything about what's blocking her from hospital placement and what it would take to remove those barriers. Silence on the line. Neka. What have you been doing for the last 3 weeks? I'll tell you everything, but first, you joined a hospital cleaning crew. Dadao. Research the pathways. Priya. She heard Priya exhale. Fine, but you owe me a real explanation. You'll get one. What Priya found over the next 48 hours was both simpler and more enraging than Naneka expected. Deo's qualifications were not the problem. Her skills were not the problem. The problem was a gap in how Georgia hospitals recognized international nursing experience for purposes of their internal hiring tiers, a policy that had been written in 2009 and never updated, that effectively filtered out nurses like Dio before a human being ever looked at their resume. It wasn't malice. It was indifference, which, Naneka had learned, was often worse. Nikacare's legal team identified 3 pathways. One took 2 years. One required Dio to essentially redo her clinicals from scratch, unpaid. One required an employer to sponsor a waiver, something no hospital had been willing to do, because the process was bureaucratic and the line of candidates without that complication was long. Naneka read through the legal memo twice. Then she called the chief nursing officer at Grady Memorial, not as Nadia Ekwu, as Neka Oca Mensah, CEO of Nikacare, member of the hospital's philanthropic advisory board, and someone who had a strong interest in discussing their international nursing pipeline. The CNO took the call within the hour. On her 28th day as Nadia Ekwu, Neka arrived for her shift and asked Deo if they could talk when the night was over. Deo looked at her. She had the perceptive eyes of someone who had learned to read situations quickly. Is everything okay? Everything is about to change. I just need you to hear me out. They sat in the hospital cafeteria at 6:45 in the morning, the early breakfast crowd beginning to filter in, the light coming gray and flat through the windows. Dio had a coffee. Neka had her hands around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. Dio, Neka said. My name isn't Nadia. Dio looked at her steadily. Okay, my name is Neka C. Mensah. No recognition. The name meant nothing to her. I'm the founder and CEO of a healthcare company called Nikacare. We're based here in Atlanta. She exhaled. We're not small. A pause. How not small? We recently closed a $40 million funding round. The cafeteria hummed around them. Somewhere a tray clattered. You've been mopping floors, Dio said slowly. Yes, with me, yes, for a month, 28 days. Dio looked at her for a long time. Why? Neka told her everything. The COO, the betrayal, the parking garage, the decision. What she had been looking for, what she had found. Dio was quiet when she finished. Her coffee had gone cold. So you were testing people, she said finally. I wasn't testing you specifically. I didn't know you existed. I was trying to remember what it felt like to be around people who weren't performing. And you think I wasn't performing. I know you weren't. I watched you with Mr. Carroll for 40 minutes. I watched you with that woman in the hallway at 4 in the morning. I watched you with that boy in the lobby last week. Nobody was watching you, Dio. There was nothing to gain, and you showed up the same way every time. Dio looked out the window. The gray light was softening to something approaching morning. I didn't do those things for you to see, she said. I know. That's exactly the point. Another long silence. What happens now? Dio asked. Naneka leaned forward. I had my legal team look at your situation. The barrier isn't your qualifications. It's a hiring policy that was written before smartphones existed and nobody has bothered to update. I spoke to the CNO here 2 days ago. She's agreed to sponsor a waiver for your placement. You'd come in as a staff RN on the medical surgical floor. Full salary, full benefits. She paused. But that's not the only thing. Deo waited. Nikacare is building a clinical navigator program. We need nurses who understand what it means to navigate a broken system from the inside. Not theoretically. Practically. People who have lived it. Naneka held her gaze. I want you to help us build it. Consulting, part-time, while you're getting established here. Paid. Equity stake, real equity. The cafeteria was getting louder around them. Trays, voices, the smell of eggs from the serving line. Dio said nothing for so long that Neka started to worry she had miscalculated everything. Then Dio said, very quietly, Abina's going to think this is a story I made up. Neka felt something loosen in her chest. Tell her the CCO was mopping floors. She'll believe it more. Dio laughed. It started as a small sound and grew, and Neka found herself laughing too, both of them sitting in a hospital cafeteria at 7 in the morning after a night shift, laughing at the specific absurdity of what their lives had turned out to be. When it settled, Dio wiped her eyes. You know what I thought about you? The first night I saw you? What? I thought. That woman moves like she's used to being in charge of things. But she doesn't know how to hold a mop yet. She smiled. I thought maybe you'd had a hard year, that you needed somewhere to be ordinary for a while. Neka looked at her. That's almost exactly what it was, I know. Dio picked up her cold coffee, looked at it, put it down. Neka, I have to ask you something. Ask. I didn't do any of this for a reward. I didn't know who you were. I want you to know that everything you saw, that's just what I do. That's who I am. I'm not changed by this. I know. So when I say yes to this, I'm not saying yes because you're powerful or because of the money. She looked at her directly. I'm saying yes because it sounds like work that matters, and because I think you're someone who actually means what she says. I've seen enough people to know the difference. Neka held her gaze. I've spent 2 years surrounded by people who were brilliant at meaning what they said, right up until it was inconvenient. I'm not that kind of person. I know, Neka said. That's why we're sitting here. The Georgia Humanitarian Award ceremony was held 6 weeks later at the Marriott Marquis in downtown Atlanta. 600 people. The governor was there. 3 senators. Half the philanthropic infrastructure of the state. Neka had been nominated months earlier, before any of this had happened, for Neka Care's work expanding telehealth access in rural Georgia counties. She had forgotten about it until Priya reminded her 2 weeks before the event. She had debated not going. She had decided to go, and to bring someone with her. Dio had looked at the invitation like it was written in a language she was still learning. This is a gala. It's a gala. Neka, I just started on the med-surg floor 11 days ago. I don't own anything you wear to something like this. That's not your problem. I'm going to look like yourself, which is the only thing I want you to look like. Dio had arrived at the venue in a deep green dress that Neka had selected, simple, floor-length, with her natural hair out in a full rounded shape that made her look, Priya had said when she saw her, like someone who had always been exactly this magnificent and was merely allowing others to catch up. She'd kept Abina with a neighbor. She'd gripped Neka's arm in the elevator up from the lobby and said, Tell me one person I have to talk to, and one thing I never have to do. The CNO from Grady. She'll be thrilled to meet you, and you never have to eat the tiny food. There's always a real buffet somewhere near the back. Dio relaxed slightly. Okay. The ballroom was everything Dio had never been in. Crystal chandeliers, an orchestra, tables laid with china. Women gowns that cost more than 3 months of her previous salary. Men in suits that fit so specifically they seemed tailored to their exact posture. She stayed close to Neka through the cocktail hour. They found the CNO, who shook Dio's hand with both of hers and said, I have heard so much about you, in a way that felt like she meant it. They found the buffet, tucked near the kitchen exit, with actual portions. And then the program began, and the MC stepped to the podium, and Neka leaned over to Dio and said, I want to warn you. I'm going to say something. About you, about all of this, and I wanted you to know before it happens. Dio looked at her. What are you going to say? The truth. The award was given. Nika walked to the stage in the kind of silence that 600 people make when they are genuinely paying attention. She stood at the podium, looked out at the room, and set down the card with her prepared remarks without looking at it. "I want to tell you about something that happened 2 months ago," she said, "and why this means something different to me now than it would have meant then." She told them. The betrayal, the parking garage, the decision, the overnight shift, the supply closet, the mop bucket. She kept Dayo's name out of it at first, just the shape of the story, the woman she had watched, the qualities she had seen, the consistency that had no audience and no agenda. "I went looking for something I'd stopped believing existed," Naneka said. "I thought maybe the world had run out of people who were kind for no reason, who showed up fully for people who couldn't do anything for them, who treated the invisible people." Her voice changed slightly, like they mattered. She paused. I found her, and she was mopping the floor 40 feet from where I was mopping a floor. And she had a nursing degree and 12 rejection letters, and a 5-year-old daughter who thinks carrots are nutritionally acceptable but culturally uninspiring. Quiet laughter moved through the room. "Her name is Dayo Adebisi. She starts her nursing career at Grady Memorial next week. And she's standing in the back of this room right now, wondering if I'm really about to do this." Neka extended her hand toward the back of the room. "Dayo, come up here." There was a pause, then movement, and then Dayo was walking through 600 people, tall in her green dress, looking like she was trying to hold her face steady and not quite managing it, and when she reached the stage and took Naneka's hand, the room came to its feet. Dayo stood at the microphone. For a moment, she looked out at the crowd. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just did what my mother taught me." She paused. "She taught me that a person in front of you is more real than a category, so you treat them like a person." Another pause. "That's it. That's the whole lesson." The applause was long. Afterward, there was a woman who found Dayo near the buffet. Her name was Serena Blythe. She was on the board of 3 Atlanta nonprofits and wore the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. She had, Naneka had mentioned once, been one of the early voices suggesting that NECA Care's target demographic was too niche to scale. Serena extended her hand to Dayo with a brilliant smile. "What a story. You're incredibly brave." Dayo shook her hand. "Thank you. It must have been so hard, all those years of struggle." Serena patted her hand once, with the particular warmth of someone making a memory of doing so. "You're very inspiring." Then Serena turned to Neka. "And Naneka, what a speech. I always knew you had a gift for narrative." She laughed. "Really, the overnight cleaning crew, very creative." Neka smiled pleasantly. "Thank you, Serena." Serena drifted away to the next conversation. Dayo watched her go. Then she turned back to her plate and took a bite of jollof rice. The real kind, from a Ghanaian caterer the event coordinator had booked, which was, Dayo had declared 5 minutes ago, the best decision anyone had made this evening. "She called you creative," Dayo said. "Like you made it up." She did. "And she called me inspiring." Dayo said the word the way you repeat back something you're not sure you heard correctly. "Like I'm a story that happened to her." "She's not a bad person," Neka said. "She just hasn't learned how to see people yet." Dayo considered this. "Will she?" Neka looked across the room to where Serena was laughing with a senator. "I don't know. Some people need to lose something first." 3 months later, NECA's former COO was facing civil charges. The partnerships director had agreed to a settlement. The $800,000 was largely recovered. NECA Care's board had rebuilt with 2 new members, one of whom, in a quiet and unremarkable appointment that made Naneka prouder than anything that had happened in the ballroom, was Priya Kapoor. Dayo had been on the med-surg floor for 12 weeks. Her patients Renee, the charge nurse, reported, asked for her by name. The Clinical Navigator program launched in beta. 47 patients in its first month. People who had been cycling through emergency rooms because they couldn't find a consistent specialist. People navigating insurance systems in a second language. People who, like Dio herself, had found that the paperwork of getting help was often harder than the problem that required it. Abina visited the Nekicare offices once, brought in on a Saturday when it was quiet, and Dio had a meeting with the product team. She walked through the whole office, with her hands clasped behind her back and her face completely serious, as if conducting an inspection. At the end, she said, "It's good, but you need a plant." Neka bought a plant that afternoon. It sat in the lobby. The team named it Abena. On a Sunday in March, Neka and Dio were sitting on the steps outside Dio's apartment. The same small place, but now with a second bedroom that Abina had painted yellow because she said gray walls were structurally pessimistic, drinking tea as the neighborhood woke up around them. "Can I ask you something?" Dio said. "Always, that night in the supply closet, when you sat down on the paper towel crate." She paused. "Why did you do that? You could have just gotten the mop bucket." Neka thought about it. "You looked like you needed someone to stay." Deo turned and looked at her. A long look. "That's what you said to me," Naneka said. "About the boy in the lobby. I didn't know it then, but I think I was trying to become someone who would say that. And I hadn't figured out yet that being around you was showing me how." Deo was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say that God sends us teachers," she said. "Not in classrooms, in hallways, in supply closets, on night shifts. What do you say?" Deo smiled. "I say she was right." The street was filling up now. Somewhere nearby a child was calling out, and a dog was barking, and someone was starting a car. All of it ordinary, all of it entirely enough. There is a kind of wealth that doesn't show up on any funding round, any Forbes list, any stage under any spotlight. You know it when you're in its presence, because something in you relaxes, something that has been braced for disappointment, quietly, for a long time. Nekas Ose Mensa had $40 million in her company's account. She had an award on her shelf and her face on a billboard. But what she had found, in a supply closet at midnight, next to a mop bucket, across from a woman with a rejection letter folded along its creases, was something she had almost stopped looking for. The kind of person who shows up the same way, whether anyone is watching or not. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Contemporary African Folktales and turn on notifications. Because the people who have the least to gain are always the ones worth watching most closely. And we are never done telling their stories.